I'm choosing that phrase, ladies and gentlemen, is because the current economic conditions and even the political situation in the country is such that it's difficult in terms of the recovery, in terms of stability, in terms of the investments, in terms of the health and the well-being of the people. And a number of things to date have been eroded in terms of both the moral fabric of the society. And those are some of the issues that both in the economic and political and social front we are confronted with. And in a business environment, if one again were then to borrow certain things, will then give short-term profits in pursuit of a bigger dream. And you may take a long view without being able to predict the outcome. And in the measurement world, you set a goal and strive for it. And in the universe of possibility, you set a context and life then unfolds. It is within that context, colleagues, that the next coming period or epoch will be a challenging one, and it requires a robust and ethical, decisive leadership in dealing with and dispensing with various issues that we're faced with as a country. And I think also, colleagues, you'll agree with me that in the current setup within lobby and advocacy, where SEIFSA plays, we need then to look at both the policy, environment, regulation, legislative, to position the organization and its association so that we then remain relevant for the benefit of our members and associations. And equally so, with the recent developments in the country from last year, where we looked at establishment of the Steel Master Plan, and again, number of our members within the SEIFSA stable or metal and engineering were elected to sit on that Steel Master Plan so that we reconfigure the industry and position it to a better heights. And again, you will agree with me that the agreement that was concluded and implemented from the 1st of January this year, the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, it also then creates an opportunity and a challenge for both companies to trade, given the current rules of origin, protocols, and tariffs. And I guess it is within that context that we need then to sharpen our positions as associations and companies so that we then remain relevant in the continent and within the global sphere. The other part that also is important to note is the BRICS configuration that in as much as South Africa, we are part of the BRICS countries or BRICS members. We need then to look at the world population because BRICS represent 42% of world population, and that must then give us an entry into the global markets in terms of trading and dealing with various requirements for both their plans and markets for our respective companies. And again, SEIFSA is an apex organization in the metal and engineering. We need then to position it to be relevant as part and parcel of dealing with manufacturing, as part of branding and dealing with various aspects within the regulatory environment where protocols, rules of origin, trade and tariffs then comes back to our members so that they benefit as a result of our participation. Equally so, you will also then agree with me that we come from a period where last year we concluded a standstill agreement within the industry, and post that period this year, the negotiations have started, and we're still going back and forth in terms of attempting to reach and conclude an agreement that will be beneficial to both sides. Colleagues, you will also then take note that the transformatory agenda within metal and engineering industry is moving in a slow pace, and equally so, we need to also to look at the reasons and the rationale why is because if the economy is not booming, the economy is in decline. It also then impacts and affects a transformatory agenda, and that's the reasons why we need then to look at all those issues in terms of addressing them. Now, some of the issues that also in the period under review is the state of the nation. I mean, you'll agree with me and my observation that we come from a period where for the past 9-10 years, the moral fabric of the society have went down south in terms of number of things, how businesses have conducted its affairs in the public gallery, how government have done number of things in terms of state capture, in terms of not doing things in a proper ethical conduct. And as a result of that, I guess we need to continue to encourage businesses and the society at large to remain resolute and do things in a proper way. Equally so, during the same period that we're faced with, whether it's the extension and the looting that took place is as a result of an internal crisis within the ruling party. And I guess any business operation, they require stability and sustainability from the ruling party. And these are some of the issues that we're then confronted with. Equally so, the next coming local government elections, if they don't deliver stability and they don't root corruption, number of companies that they deal with municipalities in terms of their products and services, state-owned enterprises, they then continue then to suffer severely so. And I guess the point that I'm raising is that we are waiting with keen interest to see people being brought to the book, being arrested and sentenced as a result of any corrupt activity, as a result of state capture, as a result of non-compliant to provisions of localization and designated or designation products. So those are some of the things that colleagues we need them to look at going forward. The same period, you will recall that the previous CEO, we have left the institution, the federation, and we then appointed Lucio to take over as the CEO for the federation. And I guess equally so, we welcome Lucio into the fold, and it's not new. He's an old veteran in the industry, and hopefully you will support that appointment so that he then steer this ship to the right direction with a clear and decisive direction from the board. And equally so, we bid farewell to Kaiser, who left the federation after a long, tedious debate and discussions within the board. And equally so, colleagues, I also appreciate and welcome the trust that the new board have been elected this morning. And I also then extend my word of appreciation, despite all the difficulties and the challenges that we're going to face, steering the direction for this organization going forward. And equally so, for those men and women that they are serving on the board, in the associations, within the staff members, in whether it can be a receptionist, a sweeper, a cleaner, and everyone in the organization, we acknowledge and recognize their contribution to this organization. And equally so, I extend my appreciation for board members that they've served their period, and they've indicated and left this federation, whether it can be Ellen from Fries Metals and other members that have left as a result of retiring to their respective employment. And I think, colleagues, with those words, I I thank all of you for your support and good luck for the year ahead. And to the new board members that have joined the board, will be calling for their wisdom, their direction, their experience, so that we then run this organization in a proper way. And the reason why, colleagues, have provided that a broad overview program director is so that we then give time to the stalwart Clem Sunter to give us words of wisdom and a clear scenario planning, so that we don't miss the boat in terms of spearheading and looking at this thing, whether we are we're having a visionary in advocating for a new way of doing things in the industry. And I thank all of you, and thank you again once more. Thank you.
Thank you, Elias. Much appreciated. Touched on some really key topics there, BRICS, the negotiations, as well as transformation. And I think it's very apt that we have Mr. Clem Sunter to talk about scenario planning and new way of doing things. But before we do that, ladies and gentlemen, SEIFSA is now in its 78th year and continues, as you are aware, to help to promote a business environment in which associations can successfully operate. The past year has been no exception, and SEIFSA has demonstrated that it plays a vital role in promoting and protecting the interests of employers in the industry. At SEIFSA, we recognize companies which have been members of associations federated to SEIFSA for a specific number of years. A special mention goes out to platinum members as follows: Prima Industrial Holdings and Umgeni Iron Works, who have been members for over 70 years. 54 companies have achieved gold membership status, and that's congratulatory to all companies, and we continue to serve you in the years to come. I now hand over to our CEO, Mr. Lucio Trentini, for a few words. Lucio?
Hi, good morning, everyone. Let me just put my camera. Good morning, everyone. Morning, Clem. I'll introduce you shortly. Welcome to our newly elected board members, our association representatives, and most importantly, our members, without whom we wouldn't be here this morning. So we appreciate each and every one of them. And then a big thank you to Elias, who has been appointed for a second, if not third term, as SEIFSA president. He's been an absolute stalwart of SEIFSA and a massive support to me and the federation. And I think that the industry owes Elias a huge debt of gratitude. Just a few comments from my side before I formally hand over the platform to Clem. In a nutshell, this has been another tough and challenging year. I mean, there's no other way to put it. I am Italian, but I'll stay away from Latin. Elias told us how to characterize the year under review. SEIFSA is in its 78th year of its existence, and we are working like crazy to remain relevant. And I think the last year, the year under review, has really shown us the true cost of the COVID-19 pandemic and the ongoing lockdown restrictions introduced by the government to help contain its spread, and the effect that that has had on our industry. The negative growth figures for 2020 as a whole demonstrate for us just how much economic ground has been lost in the year under review, and the widespread number of jobs that have been shed and companies that have had to unfortunately close down. Our metal industry benefit fund administrators alone, in our sector alone, have recorded just under 25,000 jobs having been lost in our sector. And that's something really that we can certainly do without. The economy, which is battling record unemployment and continued business failures, is only regrettably and tragically projected to recover from the negative effects of a global pandemic at best in 2022, and more realistically from 2023 and 2024 onwards. It's no exaggeration to say that the economy has been under siege. The metal industry, as is the case in many other sectors, has seen a growing number of companies regrettably having to implement short-time layoffs, business rescue, etc. And this is the sort of reality that's likely to remain with us for the next few months and possibly in the next year, 2 years ahead of us. Just as the rest of the economy felt the pain of the so-called new reality, so has SEIFSA. And as a business, things would have been much worse for us had we not taken the steps that we did take in the Federation in order to balance our books. With the benefits of some hindsight and the views put forward by many experts, I don't think it would be unfair to suggest that the government possibly could have managed the crisis a little bit differently. But it is what it is. It's behind us, and we now need to move forward. The damage has been inflicted on our economy, and it's going to take a huge effort on the part of all stakeholders in the next couple of years to return the economy and indeed our country to pre-COVID-19 levels of economic activity. So whilst it is not possible to state with a degree of certainty how the next financial year is likely to be, I would hazard a guess to say that it's probably safe to say that the 2021-2022 financial year is likely to be a little bit better, coming off an extremely low base, but a lot hinges on the trajectory that will be taken by the COVID-19 pandemic in the country in the months to come. At the time of writing my report, which is in the SEIFSA annual review, the government is adamant that it wishes to target about 35 million adults being vaccinated by Christmas Day in order to reach either herd or population, what's the word I'm looking for, herd or population immunity. And whilst we applaud this optimistic goal, and we are all doing our bit and getting vaccinated, we hope that we do achieve that milestone. Because the last thing that we need in this country, and indeed in our sector, is another episode of any form of lockdown. So we hold thumbs. We continue to do what we are doing, and we look forward to a better 2021/2022 financial year in comparison to the year that we have just been through. As our president indicated, we hope that the government will finally deliver on all the promises contained in the Steel Master Plan and the long-awaited infrastructure plan, which is intended to stimulate the economy. In closing, and before I hand over to Clem, I just want to thank the team at SEIFSA. They've done a tremendous amount of work in the course of the year under review, under the most challenging of times. And I want to just reach out and say thank you to each and every one of them. From the ladies that manage our switchboard, to the men and women who do everything that is asked of them and more in trying to add value to what our members do. As always, we are deeply appreciative of the support that we receive from the SEIFSA associations, and more importantly, their members. A federation is simply not a federation if it doesn't enjoy the support of the associations, who in turn rely on the support of their members. And then finally, my thanks and deep appreciation go to the president for his support and guidance, to the board members for their support and oversight of the federation, and for taking a gamble in appointing a guy who's been in the job for 30 years to oversee the federation for a short period of time as we work through the next couple of years. And thank you for the confidence that has been invested in me. And I promise you, I don't take this lightly, and I'll be doing my best every single day. To the board, to their collective skill, experience, and wisdom, and commitment to good corporate governance, I remain deeply and greatly appreciative. So, Clem, it's over to you now. You've got an amazing business card: scenario planner, futurologist, and keynote speaker. Enough said. I don't think that there's anyone on this platform who doesn't know you. Among your many accolades, I see that you've also been awarded an honorary doctorate by the University of Cape Town for work in the field of scenario planning. Congratulations, and richly deserved. You have been voted as the speaker who has made the most significant contribution to the impact of best business practice in South Africa by leading CEOs in the country. I do know that you have given scenario presentations in several countries, including Europe, India, Singapore, Britain, Australia, and various African countries. You've also lectured at the Harvard Business School in Boston and you've had an opportunity to also ply your trade in Beijing at the Central Party School. I have heard you speak about that too, and it's going to be interesting to hear what you have to say this morning. There is no doubt that you are regarded as the preeminent and scenario planner and strategist in the country. You have spoken internationally, and you have been a fantastic ambassador for South Africa in terms of, shapers of thought leadership and the like. I, as a young student, remember reading about your high road, low road scenario, your discussions with Mandela, and I have read many of your best-selling books. So you are a champion. Ladies and gentlemen, we are privileged to welcome Clem to our SEIFSA presidential function, and we all sit back and we will listen tentatively to what you have to say. And on behalf of the president, the board members, our council, and most importantly, our membership, thank you, Clem. The floor, so to speak, is yours.
Thank you so much, and good morning, everybody. I'd like to firstly, obviously, give a presentation, and then for any of you to ask questions afterwards. I'm going to be talking about this book, Thinking the Future. It was published by Penguin in July, and I have to say it's been the #1 bestseller on Exclusive Books non-fiction chart last month, and it's also done very well on Amazon in the Kindle version. So yeah, it's nice to produce a book that's still relevant to readers' interests. Essentially, what the book is covering, and I wrote it with Mitch Ilbery, a young man, is who are the giants who've really contributed to the philosophy of scenario planning. And we open the book by comparing Plato with Aristotle, two ancient Greek philosophers. Plato thought of an ideal world, and that all of us as human beings sit in a cave, and those who are really intelligent manage to find their way out of the shadows of the cave into that real world outside, and discover the ideal forms that exist in this ideal world. Aristotle was completely different. He was the kind of first scientist who said, you've got to take the world as it is, and you've got to look around you, and you've got to establish how things are, and then build up the whole causal chain of if this happens, and you can only do that by experiencing the world around you. And the thoughts of those two philosophers were then put together in a book in the 1960s by Isaiah Berlin, a professor of philosophy at Oxford. He called it The Hedgehog and the Fox, because a Greek poet called Archilochus said the hedgehog knows one big thing, whereas the fox knows many little things. And Plato obviously was a hedgehog because he said you've got to know that one big thing about the ideal world, whereas Aristotle was a fox because he said you've got to look around you, you've got to be agile, you've got to accept the evidence, and you've got to be prepared to change your mind. And we certainly feel that it is much better in terms of looking at the future to be a fox rather than a hedgehog. But there are people still nowadays who are prepared to bet everything on a single forecast, because that's what being a hedgehog is. And sometimes they are fantastically successful, but more often than not, they come to grief because the future goes into a different direction. So we just feel from a kind of resourceful point of view and being resilient in your business, it's much better to look at different scenarios and to weigh them up and consider the flags, which will give you an idea of the probabilities of the scenarios. But there's one other reason that we feel you should use this methodology of scenario planning, which is, as another giant in our book said, reason is the slave of passion. That was David Hume, a Scottish philosopher in the 18th century, who said that. And it's true. What impels us to action is our emotions rather than our intellect. And the way you engage people emotionally is to give them different scenarios, just like we did in the 1980s as the Anglo scenario team. We offered the high road of negotiation leading to a political settlement and the low road of confrontation leading to civil war and a wasteland. And we said to people, how are you going to contribute to making the high road happen? And we gave a presentation to the cabinet at the time with F.W. de Klerk in the chair. I went and saw Nelson Mandela in prison just before his release to talk over these scenarios. And you really engage people's emotional feelings by offering them a good and a bad scenario and saying, what are you going to do about it? Rather than saying, here's a forecast of the future and we give it this kind of probability. There's a book which is very popular at the moment called Super Forecasting in America. And it also uses our hedgehog and fox metaphor, but only insofar as you should give a forecast a probability. But we feel you've got to go the whole way and say to people, here are the possibilities, and engage them in the sense that a scenario is like a movie script. It tells you what, if you put your shoulder to the wheel, you can make happen in a very good way, but it shows you what can happen in a very bad way if people simply are ignoring reality. So yes, you've got to think in terms of multiple futures. But before you do that, you've got to look at the kind of driving forces that are making the future different. You can't just have lots of different scenarios. You've got to say, what are the things that are changing the game right now and turning the present into the future, so that when I do come up with scenarios, I've got my feet grounded in reality. And what I'd like to do is go through some of the global trends and issues that we've been picking up with our international clients, and then talk a little bit about South Africa. Well, the first global trend actually comes out of a book that I wrote with Chantal Ilbery in 2001. We called it The Mind of a Fox. And in it, we had a letter to George Bush in which we said that part of his legacy would be how much he looked at the future like a fox and captured very, very surprising futures. And we said to him, probably your most surprising future at the moment, and this was June 2001, is a massive terrorist strike on a Western city. And it happened 3 months after we published the book with 9/11. And we actually said that the reason we felt it was a huge risk to America was the increasing competition between the major religions of the world, which really started in 1990 and intensified during the 1990s. At the same time, terrorist groups got more sophisticated, and then there were the 2 attacks on American embassies in Kenya and Tanzania in 1998 by Al-Qaeda, which we felt was a real flag for something happening in a Western country. And it did. And I remember being rung up by the US State Department 6 months after 9/11 saying, how could 2 South Africans capture a possibility whereas no US intelligence agency could do it? And I said to the person who rang me, it's not because we had inside knowledge. We didn't know it was going to be planes flying into buildings in New York on September the 11th. But we knew the risk had risen because of all these flags that we concentrated on. And of course, now that flag is still there with the Americans' chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan and the re-establishment of the Taliban. That's a significant flag in terms of the fact that America is no longer a global cop. I mean, Joe Biden said as much. But equally, it shows that there's real tensions in the region. You've got the rivalry between Iran and Saudi Arabia. You had the war between Hamas and Israel. So unfortunately, the religious flag is still flying very high and is obviously casting a shadow over the world. The second flag, which we discuss with international clients, we call the red flag because it's the old communist countries. The first one being Russia. And of course, Russia is now in the news for something we've raised for years with our clients in Europe, that 25 to 30% of the energy used in Europe is supplied from Russia. And if you've seen over the last few days, the gas prices have gone through the roof. They went up 200% in one day. It's amazing. And it's because obviously Russia is controlling the supply. And it said we'll only increase it if you allow us to build an extra pipeline to Europe, which doesn't go through the Ukraine. So, you know, you've got to watch this. If you're a business in Europe, it's a flag, and you've got to cope with it. And the same is true of the UK, because the UK is dependent on Europe, which is dependent on Russia. So Russia is a very, very important country to sort of keep examining, because it can have such an impact on business in Europe and the UK. The second country is China. And as was rightly said, I did a session at the Central Party School in 2006. And it was to show them how scenario planning worked, because they write the 5-year economic plans for China. It's not a school, it's a leadership academy for members of the Communist Party in China. And very few foreigners are actually allowed on the campus, but they allowed me because they wanted to understand scenario planning. And they showed me around the school afterwards. And what was interesting was that they'd taken down all the slogans of Mao Zedong, Chairman Mao, and replaced them with slogans of Deng Xiaoping. And I said to one of the professors, why? And he said, well, when Deng became president in 1978, he said, we've got to base our strategy on two things. And this is very relevant for South Africa. He said, we, the government, have got to provide as good an infrastructure as we can as a platform for business. And he said, secondly, we've got to allow individual Chinese to create wealth for themselves. And as this professor said, in 1978, China was the 100th ranked economy in the world. And now, he said, we're number 5. And of course, they've gone up to number 2. And most people are predicting that they will become the largest economy in the world during the 2030s. And that will be huge, because it will be the first time an Eastern country has become, you know, a leader of the world. In the last 500 or 600 years, it's been dominated by the West. So this is a huge change in the game. And as was correctly observed earlier on, BRICS is a very, very important community, because it involves Brazil, Russia, India, China, and ourselves. And apart from the 42% of the world's population, it will contain the leading economy in the world. I mean, just as America took over from Britain in the last century, China is going to overtake America in this century. Obviously, I'm worried, like other people, that the current president is going back to a bit of old-fashioned Mao-type communism, and that this could have a negative impact on the economy, particularly in the area of big tech, because he's obviously worried that the power of the party is being, in a sense, challenged by industry in China. But hopefully, you know, the kind of legacy set by Deng is going to continue in China. And the third part of the red flag is North Korea and the unpredictability of its leader, Kim Jong-un. I mean, there were all those photo opportunities between Trump and Kim, but nothing happened afterwards. There's been no denuclearization. They have something like 45 nukes. They've just started their ballistic missile testing again. And so it is something that has to be watched very carefully because of the dangers to Japan and South Korea and other places. The third flag is quietly ticking away in the world, changing the global economy. We call it the grey flag of the aging of the global population. I remember in the 1980s, a Frenchman called Pierre Wack, who was a consultant to our team, saying, if Japan ever has a property crash, it will never grow fast again economically. Because in the 70s and 80s, they grew at 7 to 8%. And there was a property crash in 1990. And since then, they've grown at 0.5%. And he said it's because it's the oldest nation on earth. It has the highest percentage of people over 65. Its population is set to decline, and that cannot be good for the economy. Well, guess what? The same is happening in Europe right now. Italy and Greece are the oldest populations in Europe, and their economies are under strain. Britain has an aging population, which means national health is forever needing more money. And this should be contrasted with America, which is still a relatively young population and therefore has a more resilient economy. But even China, because of its one-child policy, now has a middle-aged population. And of course, they've dumped that one-child policy. They want Chinese citizens to have kids again. But a lot of Chinese couples are saying, we don't want more than one kid because it's much more expensive now to have kids. So, yeah. In Africa, South America, we've got much younger populations, and where countries are well governed, they've had a much higher economic growth rate than other countries in the world. The next flag, which is a very dramatic one, is what we call the anti-establishment flag. It's the fact that since 2008, the financial crash of 2008, there's been a lot of anger amongst the middle class and the working class around the world. Because what's happened since 2008 is that the super rich are back to being super rich because the stock markets have gone up to record highs and property has done well. But for ordinary people earning wages and salaries, it hasn't been a great period because they haven't been put up very much. And that's because the world economy has been a fairly tough state since 2008 and the financial crash. So right now we have as wide a level of inequality in the world as we did at the beginning of the last century. In the second half after the Second World War, things got better and there was a leveling out of society with globalization. But now it's all gone like that again. And it's meant that you've got this incredible anti-establishment feeling amongst many populations in the world, which has led to populism and nationalism. It led to Trump being elected president in the United States because even though he's very rich, he managed to get the blue-collar vote in America. It meant that Boris Johnson won the referendum for Brexit in the UK because he went up to the north of England and said, you know, let's do it against all that, the Westminster establishment. Even though he himself comes from the establishment, he recognized that there's such a powerful force. And of course, now in Europe, lots of leaders are using this anti-establishment feeling to become, you know, leaders of their country. And one of the big things they talk about is restricting immigration into their countries. So in a funny way, this flag, and particularly given social media, it's led to a much more polarized world, which is the exact opposite of the kind of globalization and freedom of movement of people and goods of the last century. The next flag is probably the most important one of all. It's the green flag of climate change. And yeah, I've did a session in London with some of the best climate change experts recently. And they said, we've only been wrong about one thing, which is we thought all this extreme weather would start to happen in the late part of this century, but actually it's happening now. And you've seen it with villages being washed away in Germany, terrible rains elsewhere in Europe, terrible droughts. Yeah, you see the pendulum swinging much more extremely because of the increased energy in our atmosphere. So this coming COP26 meeting in Glasgow in Scotland is very important. But we are not sure that things are going to change. We put two scenarios across in this book. We called one of them pandemonium, where nobody does anything. And at the end of this century, you have millions of climate change refugees trying to get into other countries and away from their own countries, which have become uninhabitable. You can have wars over water. There's so many things that can happen if we don't change things, because we've got 8 billion people on Earth trying to survive. The good scenario we call paradise regained. An old English poet called John Milton wrote a poem called Paradise Regained, but it requires a lot of effort, and it would mean that this conference in Glasgow comes up with measurable targets for every country, and there are penalties if you don't reach the targets. If they don't do that, it's not going to happen. And as Greta Thunberg, that young Swedish teenager who's now, you know, the front of the climate activists, said, it'll just be blah, 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 blah. And that's quite right. And even now, the biggest carbon emitter in the world, China, hasn't said that it's actually going to attend the meeting or not. And so, yeah, this is a huge, huge kind of flag to watch in terms of the future of the world. The next flag is a shorter term flag, and I combine it with the pandemic scenarios. It's the national debt flag. We all know that every country in the world has poured huge amounts of money into their country's economies in order to provide emergency relief. But it means that the national debt to GDP ratio has gone through the roof. In 30 or 40 years ago, people said you shouldn't go beyond 60% of GDP with your national debt. I think we're ahead of that now, but certainly Britain is approaching 100%. America is 120%. And yes, Japan is much higher, and it's always been that way, but Japanese citizens are prepared to buy Japanese bonds. But, you know, for other countries, they're well into an area where there could be defaults on debt, especially if interest rates start to rise as a result of inflation. Which really brings me on to the pandemic itself, which has been a flag. And we actually mentioned in that letter to Bush in 2001 that at some stage in this century, there could well be a pandemic that affected the world like the Spanish flu of the last century. Well, this one hasn't been as lethal. I mean, the Spanish flu killed between 50 and 100 million people. This one has killed around about 5 million people, which is obviously terrible, but it's a lot less than the Spanish flu. But what it has done, it has completely disrupted the global economy, such that even now the supply chains around the world are finding it very difficult to get their act together. Containers are in the wrong ports. All kinds of things have gone wrong during the pandemic, and it's going to be very difficult to rebuild that effective just-in-time delivery of goods that existed before the pandemic. However, there is a good scenario. We call it tightrope. It's where every government in the world walks along the tightrope trying to balance lives versus livelihoods. They don't want to fall into the trap of letting things go too quickly so that another wave of the pandemic hits. But on the other hand, they know that they've got to protect people's livelihoods and open up the economy. And what has made all the difference is something that as humankind we're very good at: innovation. And the people who came up with the vaccines in record time. I mean, like in, 1 year, what normally takes 5 to 10 years. And they work. They certainly have reduced the numbers of hospitalizations and deaths, and they possibly have reduced infections as well. So we're in a very different space now to what we were a year ago, as people, hopefully, countries are reaching the end of the tightrope. But there is that other scenario called camel's straw, which is where, because of all this emergency relief, because of all the debt in the world, we have another 2008 financial crisis. And you know, it could happen anywhere. In China, the largest property company in China, Evergrande, is in difficulty. It owes $320 billion of debt. Apparently, there's another property company in Hong Kong that's in trouble. So, you know, there could still be a shock to the global economy as a result of the pandemic. So you've got to watch, you know, defaults and the interest rates and inflation to see whether the camel's straw scenario is rising in probability. Against that background, what about South Africa? Well, in this book, we make one profound observation before we actually get to the scenarios. We say this: South Africa right now stands at an economic crossroads after years of corruption and state capture, combined with the disruptive impact of COVID-19. The treasury is virtually empty, and this is unlikely to change anytime soon. We are at a tipping point where the path we take in the immediate future could define our future for decades. And then we offer two scenarios to readers of this book. The first one we call People's Economy, to convey the message that the work achieved by Nelson Mandela and others constitutes unfinished business. In this sequel, the country now achieves economic freedom for all as a necessary complement to political freedom. The government creates an inclusive economy with a new generation of young entrepreneurs at the helm. I remember doing a debate, which you can watch on YouTube, with Julius Malema in 2015 at the Cape Sun Hotel, organized by the Cape Chamber of Commerce. And I said to him, I'm as much of an economic freedom fighter as you are, Julius. It's just that my definition of economic freedom is different to yours. You want to use the state to take over the land and possibly the banks and the mines. I want to create economic freedom for individuals in this company so that they can do what Deng said in China, that they can create wealth for themselves. And unfortunately, at the moment, we've got a very restricted economy. In fact, there's still economic apartheid in this country, because certainly the township economies, where there are a lot of amazing entrepreneurs, haven't yet got a proper link to the mainstream economy. So I want Cyril to take this seriously and possibly bring together a council of entrepreneurial advisors, people who started businesses for themselves, like Capitec and Discovery, and maybe even get Elon Musk involved, people who've really created wealth, to say these are the things that South Africa has to do in order to get out of the economic slump created by the pandemic. And there's another reason for doing this, which is that the world of work has changed. In the last century, it was big business that was the major creator of jobs. And of course, governments had sufficient money to hire lots of civil servants. But those days have disappeared because of automation and artificial intelligence destroying jobs in big business. And of course, governments being under much more financial pressure now. So the biggest creator of jobs in the world today is small business. In America, the statistics just come out. 2/3 of the new jobs being created post-pandemic are in small business. And yes, it was small business that got hit by the pandemic, but it's the first thing that is recovering in America. So we have to put huge emphasis now on small business. And as I will say at the end, SEIFSA has got to look at how it can really help all those entrepreneurs who want to come up with new ways of engineering and all the trades that SEIFSA is associated with, because that is the future. You want to get our hideous national unemployment rate down from 42% to 5 to 10%. It's going to be through an entrepreneurial revolution. And our education system is going to have to change too. Our final chapter in this book is called Planting Seeds, because we feel that you've got to educate children for the markets of the future, not the past. And schools are still educating kids for the kind of job market that existed in the last century. Now, kids have to create jobs for themselves rather than get jobs. And that means a totally different mixture of talents. And if we don't actually create a people's economy, the second scenario we call cautionary tale. Here, South Africa experiences rising popular anger caused by an economy that is stagnant, exclusive, and cursed by a dismally high unemployment rate. This leads to further disunity and widespread violence, with a possible endpoint of total anarchy in the chain of causation. And we got a taste of that 2 months ago with the terrible destruction of shopping malls in KZN and Gauteng. But it showed the other side of South Africa, which was that the communities got together to protect the undamaged properties and also to clean up the ones that were damaged. So it showed that we have that kind of team spirit on the ground to, to get this people's economy going. It's in many ways a ground-up revolution, starting at municipal level, to find ways of actually amalgamating all those entrepreneurs in the townships, in rural areas, and in cities to become successful. And so it is a very different kind of picture of the South African economy to what we have today. So I hope I've given you something to think about. I really hope that SEIFSA can be part of the group that rolls up its sleeves to create a people's economy. That's why one does scenarios as opposed to forecasts, is to say to people, increase the probability of the good scenario and do everything to lower the probability of the bad scenario. And I'd like to end with a benediction for all of you who've been listening to me. May the fox be with you. Thank you very much. And now I can take questions.
Lucia, did you want to say something? No?
No, John.
All right. Are there any questions? If you can just type it in the chat box or perhaps raise your hand. I have unmuted all participants to be able to chat live. We can take questions now.
I'll just say one more thing before somebody asks a question, is obviously we've got to get the capital side right, because entrepreneurs require money. And I do think that every city should have its own stock exchange, local stock exchange. Rather like eBay, you can float your company on a local stock exchange. You can get potential investors to come and look at it and all that kind of stuff, and use crowdfunding. And the other thing is the banks have to get together to put together a micro lending facility like the Grameen Bank in Bangladesh, which has done an incredible amount for entrepreneurs in Bangladesh. We need some kind of micro lending facility here in South Africa. And I do think that every big company should dedicate 20% of its supply chain to helping small business nurture itself. We did that in Anglo-American with a project called Zimeli, where we went round our mines and we looked at what could be produced, which we use underground by small business. And then we went and helped those businesses and financed them to do just that. So, there's a lot of things that can be done to create this people's economy. And I'd love Cyril to do what he does now, to appear regularly on television and say, this is what the Council of Entrepreneurial Experts have told me, and this is what we're going to do. Because, to be honest, it's as much a threat to this country as the pandemic was. And we need that kind of leadership to get us going.
Thank you for that. I see we have a question from Joe Mabina. Joe, you can go ahead and ask your question. Hello? Can you hear me?
Joe, can you unmute yourself?
No? Okay, while we wait for Joe to do that, there's one from Tumi. Thanks for the great insights. Where do you stand on the idea of economic codessa, and what happened to the idea since you advocated it so hard?
Yeah, I mean, I feel that I've slightly modified my idea by saying we need a council of entrepreneurial advisors, just like we have a council of medical experts at the moment. But essentially, the idea of an economic codessa is as important as the original political codessas, because, you know, we got through that political crossroads because of Nelson Mandela and de Klerk. And of course, that was the first crossroads that South Africa faced, was to become a true democracy. But we always said as a scenario team that it's not just politics. You've got to change the economy. And that's why I have for a very long time been suggesting that we have an economic codessa. And I know Cyril will say, but we've got one with NEDLAC. And, you know, we are constantly talking to people in business. But what we haven't yet got is a set of absolutely concrete proposals with time limits. Even the National Development Plan doesn't have that. And so I don't mind what kind of body actually does that, but that's what we need. Just like Glasgow has to come up with measurable outcomes in terms of what countries have to do to lower their emission targets. We've got to now have measurable outcomes over the next 5 years as we recover in terms of what we're going to do for small business. And in a sense, maybe an economic codessa is what can do that. Any other questions?
Sorry,
I was unable to
on mute
unmute.
there. I was on mute there, apologies. Yeah. So Joe Mabena's question is, what is your prediction with regards to the outcome of the elections? Will the ANC continue to dominate?
Well, the answer is I'm not a political expert, but I think this is a very interesting local election because, of course, the ANC didn't do well in the last election. They lost about 10% of the vote. And it'll be interesting to see whether they do better because now, of course, it's Cyril leading leading the team and leading the campaign, as opposed to the previous president. So, you know, it will be interesting to see what happens. But what I feel very strongly is that local government really counts in terms of an entrepreneurial revolution and creating a people's economy. The effectiveness of local government is as important as national government. So I don't mind if you have coalitions between the EFF, the DA, and the ANC in order to govern a particular town or village or wherever. But what we've got to do is obviously considerably improve the quality of the local government and be as harsh about corruption at the local level as we are hopefully one day going to be at the national level.
Thank you. There's another question from Chris. What are your thoughts about changing BBBE to something based along the lines of someone's economic status rather than race, essentially giving the poor a leg up?
Yeah, well, you know, I mean, the BBBE strategy has to a certain extent achieved its target of changing the diversity of management in business and obviously the diversity of shareholdings in business. But as I said, that is a fairly small, finite world at the moment. It's not where the general population resides. So yes, I'm not saying do something else in the place of triple BEE. I'm saying we've got to be as energetic in terms of the kind of economy that is necessary in terms of freedom of restrictions and support, financial support and other things for entrepreneurs, because that's where the majority of jobs in the future are going to be created. So we've got to rethink that. And I know that we've got a Ministry of Small Business and all that kind of stuff, but it's not seen as the key to South Africa's future. Yes, we need infrastructure, and I'm very happy that the government is dedicating more money to infrastructure because, as Deng said, you've got to have a good infrastructure. That's why they've built all those roads and airports and new power stations in China. But we have to now turn our eye to how we can integrate township economies with the mainstream economy, and obviously allow the really promising entrepreneurs to develop their businesses nationwide and then overseas. And guess what? We have the most incredible talent in South Africa. I've been around, and boy, oh boy, there are just so many talented entrepreneurs in this country. And I always talk about one called Siubelela Zuza, who grew up in the Eastern Cape. And I was chairman of the Anglo Scholarship Panel. And when we interviewed him, I said, what have you chosen as your degree? And he said, chemical engineering, because I used to mix chemicals in my mother's kitchen. And then I took on a project which was to create a rocket fuel that was more energy intensive than the stuff NASA uses to propel its rockets into space. It took me 2 years. I achieved my objective. I assembled a team. We built a rocket. I put in my fuel, and we beat the South African amateur altitude record. The project was entered into a NASA competition in America, which he won. And guess what? NASA named a minor planet after him, which is next to Jupiter, because of the originality of his work. I mean, how many people in South Africa know that we've got that kind of entrepreneur here? It's just amazing. And so that's why I want the media to talk less about the politicians and more about the entrepreneurs. Because why is America at the moment the biggest economy in the world and considered the greatest nation? Not because of its politicians. Yes, George Washington was a good politician, and Roosevelt and Kennedy, but it's the entrepreneurs that made America great. People like Henry Ford, who produced the first mass-produced car, Walt Disney, who produced the first cartoon, Bill Gates with his computer systems, and as one of our giants, Steve Jobs. We've got him in our book because he was a thinker-doer. He didn't just think, he did it. He produced these beautiful devices, and that's what we need to build on in South Africa if we're going to have the economic miracle that China has had for the last 30 or 40 years.
Leholono, I see your hand up. I'm just going to go through the ones in the chat quickly. There's a message from Howard Eldridge. How do you see the future of trade unions in South Africa?
No, well, you're still going to have big business, please. I'm not saying that, big business is going to disappear. And as we know, in many industries, small companies have unionized members because trade unions want to represent all the employees of a particular industry. And so for associations like SEIFSA and others, they've had to adapt their strategy because you have increasing number of small contractors. And yes, there are contractors who don't like to have unionized labor, but I'm very happy that trade unions continue to play their traditional role because, we always want to look after the living and working conditions of workers. In fact, my great-great-aunt, Beatrice Webb, in the UK, at the end of the 19th century, was one of the Fabian society, which really concentrated on improving workers' conditions in London, particularly, where people were, many people were poverty-stricken in the East End. So please, trade unions are, I think, a very, very important part of the equation.
Thank you. As a message from Tumi, you spoke in the fourth flag about politicization. Is it polarization versus fragmentation? It seems increasingly difficult to separate the world into the right versus the left, but that there are multiple poles that are more complex than ever.
Yeah, that's quite true, is because, one of the things we've noticed is that the internet has really created these groups who have, who are real hedgehogs because they're passionately devoted to a single idea. And it's single ideas of religion, single ideas of, how the world came about, single ideas about left-wing politics and right-wing politics. Absolutely, we have this incredible complexity where people have enormously increased their convictions about a particular point of view. And one of the terrible things is that you don't get progress that way. There was a German philosopher who said you've got to have a thesis, and then you have an antithesis, and that produces synthesis. And that's how you make progress. Well, today people don't talk to each other. I mean, I've never seen anything like the Republicans and the Democrats in the United States. They're always at each other's throats, and it's happening around the world. We live in a highly polarized world, which means the gilded cage scenario, as we called it to Bush, in which the rich old millions who live in the developed world sort of put a cage around themselves and try and protect themselves from the poor young billions who live in the rest of the world. That kind of scenario is very much in play at the moment, and it's simply not a good scenario for things like climate change, where you need people and nations to cooperate with one another. The friendly planet scenario, which we said Bush had to work towards, unfortunately at the moment is not apparent, particularly given the kind of thorny relations between America and China, which are the two biggest economies in the world.
Another message from Palesa. Great insights. Thank you, Clem. Do you think local economic development and social entrepreneurship can address socio-economic issues in South Africa?
Yes, I mean, I think that real entrepreneurs trying to make money for themselves, that social entrepreneurs are just as important. People who are not necessarily trying to maximize their own wealth, but are trying to help with the growth of small business generally. So I've had a lot to do with NGOs, non-profit organizations, which are helping with this small business revolution. So please, we need social entrepreneurs to make this happen. But I would like to point out that it does require a completely different view in government about small business and the informal sector. I actually, in this book, we quote a South American economist called Hernando de Soto, who says, you've got to bring the informal sector in from the shadows and make it part of the mainstream economy, because nobody really knows how many jobs in South Africa are, in that informal sector, because we've never done proper work on it. And it's because it's never been seen as a priority. But given the way work has changed, it's now got to be formalized, and it's got to be given support.
Thank you. Lehololo, you can now ask your question.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Clem. And as a former Anglo-American land official, thank you for the future that you've created for a lot of us. Just a quick question regarding the issue of BBBE versus employee share option scheme and the unions. What is your opinion in terms of the three variables, especially from a manufacturing sector perspective, of saying, should the employee share options be more looked into versus normal BEE, maybe that will have an impact on manufacturing, and how will that impact the unions? It's Hlololo Moloi, CEO of Mining Equipment Manufacturers of South Africa. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. That is. I've always said employee share ownership schemes are absolutely critical. In fact, I raised that issue when I did that debate with Julius Malema. That he talks about taking over the land, land expropriation. I said, look, what you have to do is persuade the big farmers to provide shares in their business to their workers, and I believe that's a fundamental change in the model in the world, that you should have co-ownership of business with your employees. And so, yeah, I mean, obviously, Triple BEE was there to, as I said, improve the diversity of management and all those things. But I think that employee share ownership schemes are absolutely essential, so that a company can say, this is our company. It's not just, owned by complete strangers, and you have the board of directors. I mean, Germany is very strong on this model, that they even have two boards. They have a kind of an overall corporate board, which is represented by trade unions, and then they have the operational board underneath that overall board in Germany, because they believe in that. They believe that you should have, quite widespread employee share ownership in a business. So I believe passionately in that, and it should be part of the new model.
Thank you. Bernie, you may now ask your question. Bernie, are you there? No. Joe, do you have another question? Joe Mabena, do you have another question?
No, I don't have.
Okay, I'll just.
I can speak now. I've unmuted.
All right, great.
I've got two questions, Clem, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
The first is, do you anticipate default in the USA if the Republicans continue to vote against raising the debt ceiling?
Yep.
And the second one is, you quoted Deng Xiaoping as saying that the state must provide an effective infrastructure platform and a competent civil service on which entrepreneurs and the economy can build.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we don't have either of those, and the prospects for both are not good. The railways are not providing an adequate service to industry or to commuters. Eskom can't provide power, and our civil service is not competent. How do you see us taking those issues forward?
Well, let me just deal with the second one first. Obviously, like everybody else, I feel that state-owned enterprises should be run by people who understand that particular business. You can't just put, a colleague into that business. It just doesn't work that way, business. You need people who've been in it for years. It's like any game of sport. You want to play good rugby, you've got to play a lot of rugby or cricket or things. And so, yeah, you cannot appoint people to senior positions who have no experience of that business. So, quite right. There's a whole bunch of other actions that have to be taken besides, restructuring the economy for the growth of small business. And one of them is obviously creating a much more competent array of state-owned enterprises. I do think that Eskom is working on that, and I think Telkom has actually done a pretty good job. So I'm not quite as pessimistic about all SOEs. I obviously feel as strongly as you do about corruption, and that that after all these commissions we're going to have to have proper justice, and we've got to weed it out, because you can't have taxpayers' money being kind of misused to the point that you can't do a proper job. So, and I must say, when I was at the Central Party School, it was very clear that the Chinese are very, very tough on civil servants that are corrupt. I mean, I just remember, that one professor said, we don't allow for, that type of corruption in China. I'm sure it exists, but at least the attitude at the top is that you've got to minimize it. I feel very strongly that we've got to improve state-owned enterprises. On your first question on, whether America is going to have a financial crisis because the Republicans are not going to allow the Democrats to raise the debt limit. Already there are discussions between the leader of the Senate, the Republican leader of the Senate, and Joe Biden. And I think that they're going to put something together, because even the Republicans don't want to be accused of being the people who brought the American economy to its knees. I think that the odds are on that they're going to do some last-minute deal to extend the debt limit for a period, and then they're going to have until December, and then they're going to have some other kind of deal afterwards. But it doesn't alter the fact that the American government now is heavily indebted. And unlike the Chinese and the Japanese, a lot of that debt is owned by other countries. I mean, I remember in 2006, China's portfolio of US bonds was $1.5 trillion, $1.5 trillion of US bonds they own. And so, even if they come to a deal on raising the debt limit, it doesn't alter the fact that, how are they going to pay the interest on that debt, particularly if the inflation rate in America starts rising and the Fed has to raise the interest rate in order to cope with the rate of inflation. That creates a pretty disastrous scenario. So there's more to, the nasty economic scenario than just the Republicans obstructing the debt limit, which I don't think they're going to do.
Thank you. So there's a question from Ann Thompson. Hi, Clem. Many thanks for the wonderful presentation as always. Reference the agricultural sector, food production and growing markets. How does one access funding for projects that are green, at least medium-sized employers, i.e. job creation and impact on good health with solid returns, but can't access either competitive debt or equity finance or funding from foreign governments, which seems to disappear into a black hole and not heard of subsequently?
Yeah, well, that's why part of my sort of vision of creating this kind of circle of entrepreneurial advisors covers the whole financial field. As I said, we need the banks to rethink their whole role in this kind of new people's economy that I'm talking about, and absolutely with green projects as well in agriculture. We've got to balance the flags, and we've got to reduce our carbon emissions in this country. But one of the great things which is coming across now is localization. The fact is that if we really want to reduce carbon emissions, we should be producing more food locally, and it doesn't have to be imported or flown in or whatever it is. In fact, in the book, we've got an example of a young man taking a young girl out to dinner, and she orders some exotic meal, which is, from all corners of the earth, and sitting on her plate. And he then faces two scenarios. Does he say to her, that's actually not a good idea because, the carbon footprint of what you're about to eat is very high? Or does he shut up because he doesn't want to spoil the evening? So in that sense, we've got to take minimizing carbon footprints seriously. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to have more localization of industry, and particularly localization of agriculture, where, farmers in your vicinity provide a lot of your food needs. That's what going green means, apart from obviously using green chemicals or green this or green that in the actual process of farming.
Thank you. So a question from Elias Monareng. Is South Africa still positioned as a preferred investment destination in Africa, or have we lost the opportunity to other African countries?
Well, I think that you know, we were losing it because of the lost years of our economy between 2011 and 2020, because some economies in Africa have done incredibly well in terms of economic growth. I mean, the Nigerian economy has been growing at 7 to 8%, so has the Ghanaian economy. You know, there are economies in Africa that have done incredibly well. And indeed, the South African economy is no longer the sort of prominent leader. It's rivaled by Nigeria, it's rivaled by Egypt. And so, yes, we've lost our status as the sort of leading industrialized nation in Africa. But of course, the riots we had in our shopping malls 2 months ago further dented our image. So we've got to rebuild it. But as I said, the great thing about that particular incident was the incredible pushback by communities generally. And so I do feel that South Africa is still regarded as a good destination for business, and particularly not just in South Africa, but having a base here and then going out into the rest of Africa. And that's why, you know, big tech, Facebook, Google, and others, you know, would like to have their center of operations in South Africa at the moment. So I'm confident that we can still attract foreign investment. And it was such fantastic news that we're now no longer part of the red list in the UK, and that people can come and stay here as tourists and not have to face, you know, quarantine when they go home.
I don't seem to have any more questions on the chat. This is the last call for questions. Does anybody have any other questions? Now's the time to ask. All right. Oh, sorry, I see, is it Anne again? Would you like to ask a question? You can unmute yourself, Anne.
Anne, you must unmute yourself.
No.
Anne, I can't hear you because you're not unmuted. You must unmute yourself.
No.
Anne, could you unmute yourself? Could you?
Anne, you need to unmute yourself.
Oh dear.
No.
That's a shame.
No.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you, Anne.
No. And I think you'd have to type your question in again. We can't hear you. There's something wrong with your sound. Joe, they are requesting your contact details. I can share with them your email address if that's okay, or?
Yes, yeah.
All right. I will put the email address in the chat a little bit later. Are there any other questions? No? Oh, yes, please. Contact details. Oh, and is that what you wanted? The contact details? Okay, no problem. I am going to be. Oh, there's another one. What are your thoughts on improving the unemployment rate in South Africa?
Well, I've said, you know, unfortunately, you can't use the methods of the last century, which is big just big infrastructural projects and taking on more people in the civil service and attracting big business to, you know, industrial parks, which has been the kind of classic way to bring down unemployment. It's going to be creating a much more attractive entrepreneurial environment so that people can start businesses. And I might add that, you know, that's why Germany again is so good and is the paramount economy in Europe, despite losing 2 world wars. It is the biggest economy in Europe because they have trade schools. And in fact, technical education in Germany is as important as academic education. And so, yeah, that's how we conquer South Africa's unemployment rate, is promoting entrepreneurs, changing the education system so that technical education is on a par with academic education, those kind of things.
There's a question from Rolf. How do you see the mandatory vaccination affect business?
Well, you know, I'm very pro-vaccination. I mean, I've had been double jabbed along with most of my friends and family and everybody else. I think it's critical because there is a lot of evidence to show that it does reduce the risk of serious illness from infection and obviously death. So, you know, I want to see the vaccination program, you know, spreading as fast as it can, and you know, companies can make it mandatory that their employees are vaccinated. I know that it's going to be taken to court because obviously it's about the rights, the fundamental rights to freedom of an employee versus vaccination. And I'll look forward to hearing what the lawyers say about it. But for me, you know, it's absolutely clear that one wants to have the maximum number of people vaccinated in the shortest period of time.
So I think Rolf just added, it says that may be so, but what about natural immunity?
Yeah, no, look, there's natural immunity as well. But it does mean that more people have to sort of catch the virus, because, you know, you talk to people about herd immunity and they will talk about 80% of the population, you know, having sort of had whatever virus is around. I think that vaccination has allowed a lot of people to become, you know, as I said, not immune to catching the virus, but immune to serious illness. And so I think that's a good alternative to just naturally creating herd immunity. But it's happening, you know, it is happening in this country and in other countries as well. So there shouldn't be, it won't be stopped.
All right, let me just see. I think there's one from Kunal. No, it's just a. All right.
Can I just add that the 2 countries, interestingly, which are very vulnerable now to further infection, are Australia and New Zealand, because they basically shut themselves off from the rest of the world. So they have a minimum of, you know, natural immunity at the moment. And of course, the number of infections is rising in both countries, well beyond what it was in the last year. So they're quite fragile. And I must say, Australia's rolled out its vaccination program very quickly and is continuing to do so. And New Zealand, thank heavens, is now beginning to really roll out its vaccination program.
Thank you, Clem. There appears to be no other questions. I have put Clem's details in the chat box. Sunter, SUNTER @global.co.za. On behalf of SEIFSA, our president, Mr. Elias Munache, and our CEO, Mr. Lucio Trentini, thank you so much for giving us a lot of nuggets to think about. I will be making this video available online as well for anybody to view post today. I want to wish everybody well, have a COVID-free weekend, and hopefully we will reach a settlement agreement in the next week so that we can move forward as a country and claim our right within the African context as well. Thanks so much, Clem. Appreciate
and thank you, and good luck to SEIFSA, very important organization, incredibly important for the future of this country. And as I said, may the fox be with you.
And you too. Thanks, everybody. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.